Hi everybody, Dr. Smock here. In this video, I'm going to show you how to take a lower third designed inside of Photoshop and bring it into After Effects while preserving all of the layers that were originally used in Photoshop so that we can animate them individually. So to begin, I'm going to bring in my Photoshop file. So I'm just going to right-click on my project pane here and import the file, LebowskiThird.psd. What I want to do before I click open is change the import as setting from footage to composition retain layer sizes. That's going to help ensure that we get all of those layers that we want to be able to work with to actually come in to After Effects to preserve those. So I click open, I get a pop-up here. It says here, this is the kind of import you're trying to do. Do you want editable layer styles? Yes, we do. So I click OK. And that PSD comes in to After Effects. It's imported with its own composition. So when I double click on that, I can see my Photoshop lower third right there. And then down in the timeline in layers, I can see the individual layers for each of those individual components of the lower third. So the text is just labeled the dude, so kind of the subtext that's currently there, the main title or name. Rectangle 1 is just the gray rectangle. I'm going to rename that gray rec so I don't lose track of it. And then I have the yellow box for the subheading there. If I grab my text tool and I try to click in here on any of that existing text, it doesn't work. In fact, I clicked and dragged, so I got a new text layer. I'm going to undo that real quick. If you want to edit the text that you initially created in Photoshop, you need to convert it. So I have two text layers. I want to convert both. So I'm going to select the first one, hold Shift, select the second one. I'm going to go up to Layer and then go down and select Convert to Editable Text. Once I do that, you'll see that the little icon next to the layer has changed. Instead of just the Photoshop icon, now I have a regular text icon. And if I grab my text tool, I can go in there and I can change that text up however I would like. Right, before we go any further, I want a little bit more room to work with. So right now our canvas size is just set to the size of the lower third that I brought in. So I'm going to go up to Composition, Composition Settings, and I'm going to choose the HD TV 720 2997 preset here. And I'm going to increase the number of frames that we have in the composition. I'm just going to bump it up to, I'll bump it up to 30 for the moment. I'll end up kind of bringing that back down a little bit later, I think. But 30 gives me some nice room to work in. Also, one of the things that you may have noticed working in After Effects is if you have a really small composition in terms of its length, you get stuck working in frames. You'll see the F down here along the timeline. If I zoom back out a little bit here, I get my seconds back. If you have a really short composition, when you zoom back out, you're still stuck in frames. And I prefer to work in seconds. So this will work for what I want to do here. I'm also going to drag a few of these rulers out of the way, these guidelines, I should say, not the rulers themselves. But these are guidelines that came in with the Photoshop document from when I had done some of that work. So let's get those out of the way. All right, now that we're all set up, we're going to work on our first animation. We want to animate this gray rectangle so that it scales from nothing, from 0, on the left all the way across to the right at 100%. So it'll look like it's appearing out of thin air on the left as it expands to the right. I'm going to turn off our text layers and our yellow rectangle layer so we can just focus on the gray one while we're working on this. And to start, I'm going to show you a really easy mistake to make. So you're ready to animate, you're all excited about it, and you just jump right in. Here's what can happen. So I'm going to hit S to bring up my scale options. Playhead's in my first frame here. So I'm going to drop a keyframe in, and I'm going to set this to 0. I'm going to go forward about a half a second here and set it to 100. You might initially think, okay, great, that sounds like it's going to work out really well for us. But it's not. As I scrub back and forth between my two keyframes, you can see what the result is. I'm scaling, but it's not from nothing over on our initial keyframe on the left to 100% over on the right. It's going from 0 to 100%, scaling out from the middle. Essentially, it's going from this anchor point that's right here. This anchor point was just set by default when we brought the Photoshop document into After Effects. So what we need to do before we do any scale settings with our keyframes, let's get rid of those two, we need to change where this anchor point is. Another mistake that people often make, I'm just going to hit S to get rid of scale and A to bring the anchor point settings up, just coming here and clicking and dragging. It does change where the object is in relation to the anchor point, but what happens when I turn all these other layers back on? Everything was really nicely lined up before, and now I'm going to have to reposition all of it. Hide those again and undo our move here, get it back where it was. Instead, what you can do is you can grab the pan behind tool here. You can click and drag that over. You can see as I'm doing that, these anchor points are changing. So I want to get it so that our left point is at 0, right? Our left box. Watch what happens if I just go in there and click 0 in that box. Again, it moves the whole shape, right? I don't want that. But the pan behind tool, I can just drag it over here, get it on 0, and we're good to go. Now, I hit S to bring up my scale options. I'm going to drag my playhead back to the first frame here. Insert a keyframe. I'm going to say 0. There's still going to be an issue, just to give you a heads up here. It's just going to be a different issue. I'm going to go ahead here to the half-second mark, 100. Now when I toggle back and forth, I'm going from left to right, but it's expanding both the width and the height from left to right. And that's not the effect I'm going after either. So I'm going to delete both of those keyframes and explain why that was happening. It's because we have these two numbers linked together to help constrain the proportions of our shape so we don't end up stretching something and having it look really funny. In this case, I don't need that. In fact, I don't want it at all. It's preventing me from doing what I want to do. So I'm going to click this unlink icon. Now I have independent control over the X and Y percentages here. So if I come over here and put in 100, you can see that now I have the height. There's nothing there because the width is at 0, but After Effects is indicating this height for us based on kind of the edge of that shape. I'm going to drop a keyframe in there, go forward a half a second, and I'm going to increase this to 100. Now when I toggle back and forth between those keyframes, I'm getting the kind of animation that I want. It expands from nothing to everything. Rewind here. There we go. That's exactly what I want. I'm just going to select that last keyframe and hit F9 to apply easy ease to it. So it's a little bit less jerky there at the end. It kind of eases into that final frame of the animation. And now we're ready for our next step. So for that next step, let's have the text appearing, the person's name. So I'm going to turn that layer back on, our Jeff Lebowski layer. And I want it to start appearing right about the time that the gray rectangle is fully expanded. So I'm going to click and drag that element out on the timeline so it's right about there. I might back it up in a minute. We'll see how it looks. So with this one, I think I'm just going to have it fade on. It'll be a nice, simple animation onto the screen for us. So I'm going to hit T to bring up the opacity settings. I'm going to set it to 0 initially. I'll go forward a half second to the 1 second mark. And whoops, I forgot to hit the keyframe when I was back there. Come on back. There we are, keyframe there at 0%. And come forward to the 1 second mark. Put in 100. That puts my other keyframe in. And so now it fades in. When that ends, when the name appears, so it's completely in at that point, I want the yellow rectangle that's going to be the background for our subheading to just drop down from behind the gray rectangle. So I'll turn that one back on so we can see it. And I'm going to drag it forward as well. So I would start right there. And I'm going to click P on my keyboard for position, insert a keyframe, and I'm just gonna, whoops, I clicked on the wrong box. There we are. I'm gonna click and I'm gonna drag that up so it's right behind it so we can't see it at all. Then I'll just come forward, doing all these in about half-second increments here, it seems. So I'll come forward and then I will bring it out. There we go. And then as that finishes its animation, I will have the title come in. The title for our individual. So the dude. All right, so I'm just going to move that element forward in the timeline a little bit too. And I can just have that one fade in like our Jeff Lebowski. I think that'll be an easy effect to do here. So I'll set my opacity to 0 in that frame. Come forward a half second, set it to 100. There we go. So that's how our lower third would animate into position on the screen. Now let's say we want to have that animate back off the screen. Well, I'm going to start with my last thing that I did, and that was the opacity for the dude. I'm going to copy that keyframe, and I'm going to drop it in place where my playhead is. And I move my playhead forward to the 5-second mark. I'm going to come ahead another half second, and I'm going to copy that first playhead, or that first keyframe, and paste it in right there, so that this comes in, it sits there for a few seconds, and then it goes back out. And I can do that then with my other keyframes too, right? So the next thing that would fade out would be the actual yellow rectangle. So I can paste that one in, go forward half a second, copy the other one, paste that in. So now we'll see that kind of happen in reverse as well. Okay, and I'll just do the same thing for my last two here. So I'm going to bring my playhead back right there. I'm going to grab that keyframe for the name, go forward, grab that one, and then I think I'm going to leave that as an easy use keyframe. Go forward, second mark there, paste that in. And I created a little bit of a problem I'll have to fix here in a second. So expands out, there comes the name, stays on the screen for a few seconds, and then essentially the animation reverses. So I don't want that yellow box just be hanging out there. I mean, I could throw a keyframe in and just have it disappear. I can also double click on it and come into actual view of the object, and I can set an out point for it. So I can drag my playhead back and say, all right, so by this point it has finished its animation, set out point, and that's just going to cut off how long it appears in the timeline. So I click back out to the composition and I rewind here. Now it's gone. Let's take all these and group them together with a null object. So we kind of worked right here in the middle of our canvas, right? So if I want to click and drag all these, or click and resize all these, get the right selection tool activated here. If I do that, I'm going to have all sorts of trouble. Things are going to scale goofy kind of around their anchor points, which are going to be in different places depending on what I have selected. It's going to be a nightmare, essentially. So what I can do to help with scaling and also the moving of these, Although the moving isn't too bad, right? I can just change where something's located without too much trouble. But to make life easier, I'm going to go to Layer, New, Null Object, which is just like an empty object. And it's represented on the screen right now by this red box. I'm going to select all my layers and then click on the little parent icon here for one of them and drag it to the null and release. That's essentially grouping them to that object. And that means when let me click off of some of those layers, when I click on the null, or when the null is selected and I move it, I'm moving everything that's connected to it. Or if I click on one of its handles here and I resize, hold shift to constrain proportions, I'm resizing everything attached to it at the same time. It kind of creates a common anchor point is another way to think about it. We can see that anchor point right there in the corner, right? So yeah, I can move it all over, I can change the size. It gives me a lot of flexibility. So I can still kind of do my animation. Whoops, clicked on the wrong thing there. I can still do my animation while it's in the middle of the canvas area, maybe larger than I really want it to be in the end, and then really scale it down for use in the actual production I'm going to stick it into. So that is how we can create a lower third from a PSD file, preserve those layers, animate them individually, and then control them with a null object. The only thing left here is this time in the composition is much too long. So I'm just going to go to composition settings. Let's see, we have keyframes that go up to 7 seconds if I remember. So I'm just going to set this to go just to go 8 seconds. If you set it directly to the mark, you kind of lose that keyframe and it does some funny stuff. So we'll just set it to 8 seconds. Hit OK. Let's play it back one more time here. There we go. Let me know if you're having any questions while you're working on this.